If I'm gonna be honest, I didn't expect to be talking about Metal Gear Solid again so soon, especially when I'm trying to avoid creating a one franchise only channel. But after the reveal of Delta, let's just say it didn't take much for my obsession with this franchise to kick back into high gear. I jumped straight into Metal Gear Solid 5, wanting to do a couple missions to satisfy my stealth itch. Realized I had lost all my progress, didn't really feel like playing everything from scratch, but regardless, I pushed on until the point it finally lets you off the leash, so I can get back to just doing missions. And then I kept playing, and playing, and yeah, needless to say, I dumped another 100 hours into my playtime. Doing this not only gave me the chance to revisit the story with fresh eyes, disconnected from the hype, but it also forced me to rediscover why this game still holds the crown for the best stealth action gameplay. And what were the results of this? Well, if some of you were hoping for a fresh new take, I'm sorry to disappoint. I absolutely adore this gameplay. Nothing except Hitman 3 came close to satisfying my love of stealth, but the story I was so disappointed with back in 2015 failed to win me over. That's not to say I didn't find moments I truly appreciated this time around, that I didn't back then, but because it's tied to a giant open world game with so much tedious filler before you get to the meat of the story, these moments did not do enough to overshadow my issues with the game. What I loved about the game, I loved twice as much, and what I was so disappointed by frustrated me even more. Some of you might wonder why I can be so conflicted over a game with gameplay as good as this. After all, gameplay is all that matters at the end of the day. For some, yes. For me and most MGS fans, not a chance. In my eyes, gameplay is merely another tool to engage with entertainment. There are plenty of games with lackluster and basic storytelling, but because the gameplay is so fun, it's more than enough to satisfy the player while also killing a few hours. But what about when you want to go beyond that? When you want to play something that leaves you questioning yourself or the world long after its conclusion, something that connects to you on a personal level. It could be as simple as feeling sad for a character's death, or in an extreme case like mine, a game could actually help me overcome trauma from a recent accident that nearly killed me. I know that not everyone engages with media to a crazy extent like that, but if a game gives you something other than surface level entertainment and emotionally affects you, even in a small capacity, then I guarantee that that will be the game that sticks with you most. It's the reason why someone like me goes back to MGS 1. Why would I go back to a game with simplistic gameplay that has aged poorly? Simple. The storytelling gives me purpose to see it through to the end with no complaints. The Last of Us isn't hailed as one of the greatest games of all time for its gameplay. I actually consider that gameplay pretty straightforward, lacking any real innovation. But its masterful storytelling and fleshed out characters elevate it to the point that it will stand the test of time, regardless of how many remakes it has. I mention all of this because it'd be so easy for me to just blurt out some pointless statements like MGS5 is a bad game, or MGS5 has good gameplay, story sucks, case closed. But that contributes absolutely nothing of value. No, instead I'd like to explain not only my feelings towards the game, but to give context to the mindset I had going into it. The truth is, I've never had so many conflicting thoughts about a game before, and that's most likely because it's tied to my favourite gaming franchise. Death Stranding was an easier pill to swallow because it was a new IP with new characters I had yet to care about. So when I walked away from that game, adoring the gameplay and world but only pieces of the story, I wasn't as conflicted because it didn't have 30 years of build up for a franchise I love behind it. Alright, that's enough rambling. It's time to get into the meat of my argument. Let's start with what I love most, the gameplay. Stealth action has always been my favourite genre of gaming, ever since I moved on from platformers back in the early days. The absolute thrill of being so close to a target that has yet to see you, the ridiculous amount of tension building up, and the exhilaration you feel when you pull off a risky stunt. Hell, I even love when things don't go well, and I have to adapt to the immense punishment of being spotted. Trying to scheme a way out, thinking on the fly, trying to kill it as little as possible. We're a long way from the days of MGS2, where if you didn't take out the guard before you report spotting you, it's practically game over.
Enemy sighted. Requesting backup unit.
MGS5 is punishing yet perfectly reasonable once you get the hang of guard patrols and gunplay. In my last video I mentioned that MGS3 has a ridiculous amount of ways to deal with guards and lots of fun and wacky methods to experiment with. Well, MGS5's gameplay is a full realization of that potential on a much grander scale. Your playstyle can be completely tuned and customized. You can breeze through a mission in 15 minutes, or 2 hours if you have a fondness for taking your time, which I do. Any game can have a crazy amount of variety when it comes to companions, enemy placements, devices to use or fight against, and even gameplay mechanics. But what makes MGS5's assembly of all these elements stand out so much? It's because of how organically all these variables weave together when just one wrong variable could have made this house of cards collapse so easily. In what other game can you have a water gun, a balloon decoy, a supernatural sniper companion, and a massive tank, and have it all feel so natural to the gameplay? Some games suffer from offering too much wacky freedom at the expense of having the puzzle pieces fit together naturally. MGS5, however, has the perfect balance of that without ever overstepping the line. It's hard to truly explain how well it all fits together in words. It's an experience that requires dozens of hours of gameplay to understand just how well designed all these variables are. It's a testament to how natural it all feels when you stop seeing the scripts after a while and just experience the game without thinking. It also blows my mind that a game with a massive open world like this, and graphics that still beat many games released today, still runs flawlessly on a PS4 at 60 frames per second. I don't think people understand how mind-blowing that is. But then again, we do live in a time where optimization doesn't really matter anymore. Release whatever you have. One mode I happened to spend more time on in this playthrough was the FOB system. It helps that the player base is so small that retaliations are unlikely now, whereas back when the game came out, I was getting invaded non-stop. The mode is the closest we get to that old MGS feel of infiltration, not too open, and you receive severe punishment when spotted. I got my ass kicked so many times when I started out, but now I'm at the point where I can steal and dismantle player nukes. It made me realize just how unique asynchronous multiplayer actually is. Going from Dark Souls to this and then Death Stranding as well, it's such an underrated feature of gaming. This would never happen, but I would love to see the FOB system expanded like crazy in future. Maybe it could be set after the events of MGS2, because at that point in the timeline, every country and private military force has their own Metal Gear. So why not expand the customization of player bases, allowing them to be inland or at sea, and let the player have their own Metal Gear that they can fully customize. Make it so that the invading player can choose to fight it, not unlike how Solid Snake and Otacon went all over the globe to take down Metal Gears. I had never thought of that concept until now, and it's kind of blowing my mind. We're getting off track. You're not here to listen to my concept of future Metal Gear games. The only complaints I have with the gameplay is not with the gameplay itself, but the bizarre and annoying design decisions needlessly getting in the way. Like the helicopter, for example. I'm sure they spent a lot of money perfecting the helicopter's animations, but there's so little reason why I should be forced to watch the entire intro every single time. It gets particularly frustrating after the 100 hour and you just want to get to the mission fast. This wouldn't be as egregious if you were allowed to board the helicopter to take you somewhere else on the map, now forcing you to return to the ACC, wasting 40 seconds, then select the mission, then waste another 60 seconds to get to the area you want. Also, whoever thought it was a good idea to spoil the characters that will show up in a mission with the opening credits should be fired. Alright, I feel a rant coming on, so I'm gonna move on to the things I didn't like, whilst finishing the video with a few moments that were really magnificent. Let's begin with the thing that really got on my nerves after a while, and that is the unnatural dialogue. The biggest victim of this is Kaz. In Peace Walker, he was such a fun and fleshed out character who may have joked around a few times, but he had so much heart behind him, and the bond between him and Snake was just really wholesome, not unlike David and Otacon. In this game, however, all he ever says are statements like,
"Boss, I have phantom pain. I need my vengeance. Boss, I got my revenge. I feel empty now, but my phantom pain lives on."
no one talks like this. He may be the only intelligent character in this game, but he has the dumbest lines. It's the games where Kojima has the most control over the English dialogue that tend to have the most unnatural performances. MGS4 suffered a lot from this, but it never got this bad, and it only seemed to get worse in Death Stranding. The best and most natural sounding dialogue in a Metal Gear game goes to Metal Gear Solid 1, and that's only because the English translator did his own thing against the wishes of Kojima, and that's why I'll always have my favourite voice performance out of any of these games. The themes of this story become so heavy-handed when every character is just a vessel to explain them. We lost so much potential for real emotional depth with characters like Code Talker, a Native American who was taken from his homeland. Think of all the pain and trauma he suffered through, which could help him and Snake relate to each other, and they could share actual character moments. Nope, let's just have him explain parasites and Wolbachia every single time he's on screen. The real offender is Ocelot, who's been stripped of all his wacky, insane antics just to be a convenient encyclopedia for Snake. There are only a couple moments in the game where we could actually see the demented Ocelot coming out. It's when he's torturing Emmerich. You can tell he's actually enjoying it. That's very Ocelot. When it comes to Snake, if you're going to spend half the game's budget on acquiring an A-list actor like Kiefer Sutherland, why not use the hell out of him? Sutherland does really well with facial capture. I can tell a lot about Snake just from his eye movements and facial expressions, but Snake spends most of these cutscenes just staring at people and saying nothing, when his opinion could greatly benefit the situation, being the boss and all. This creates some awkward moments. They didn't need Sutherland to do simple stuff like that. Skullface was another victim of terrible dialogue, and whose character amounted to nothing by the end. He probably has the coolest design out of any Metal Gear Solid villain, and a really cool backstory. But hilariously, Liquid steals the show yet again, with only half the screen time. Honestly, the performance of this young actor is really underrated. This is exactly how I imagine a young Liquid Snake. Tough as hell, with a massive grudge against the world, especially Big Boss. He's just impossible to deal with. Shame his story's conclusion was cut. Speaking of cut content, that really would have elevated this game to new heights. Poor Chico. The potential of what would have been his story is so good. I hate that I'm now cursed with knowing it. If you don't know, Chico was supposed to return in Phantom Pain. He was supposed to have survived the crash, but he would have been scarred like hell, having a permanent smile, looking like the devil, and most importantly, he would have been this game's version of the Cyborg Ninja, minus the cyborg part. His design is so good, and it would have fit this game's themes extremely well. Probably having a massive grudge against Snake for failing to save Paz, and you would have battled him many times before seeing the resolution of his tragic story. I wish they never told us this cut content, because that loss of potential is depressing. Let's get back to the things that actually are in this game. I suppose it's time to talk about Quiet. The funny thing is, Stephanie Jewson gave a really great performance as Quiet. There's so much depth present just in her limited expressions, lots of regret and sadness, which comes full circle when you realize what her goal actually was, and how she chose not to go through with it. But you all know what the problem is. All of these great character attributes are hidden behind the most insulting fan service I've ever seen in any game I've ever played. There are worse cases of fan service out there, I'm sure, but I bet they're in games that you expect it. Not a game that takes itself so seriously, representing the true horrors of war, disease, poverty, vengeance, extreme violence, and even child soldiers. The only time I actually appreciated Quiet was her final scene. It's directed extremely well. There's a sandstorm, so the helicopter can't find Snake. Pequod is asking for directions, but Snake is dying, and Quiet can't let herself talk in English because she's carrying a specific strain of the virus that will spread if she speaks English. But with no time left, the music swells so you don't hear the sandstorm anymore, just her voice, and she begins to give directions in English, knowing she'll have to leave and will soon die. It was such a powerful scene. So powerful, in fact, I almost forgot how dumb the fan service was throughout the entire game. I didn't know how to feel about Venom Snake back when I completed the game for the first time in 2015. I didn't like the extremely meta integration of the player into his character. I appreciated what Kojima was going for, but it seemed too much and too illogical. It's once I finished the story again this time around that I had a new perspective. I saw him less as a vessel for my own identity, and instead treated him like his own established character. I mean, he was a combat medic, Big Boss's best soldier. Despite not really understanding it the first time, there was one scene in this game that completely won me over to his character, and that's this moment. Paz is recovered, having somehow survived jumping out of the helicopter, and is trying to trick you into thinking that the bomb didn't go off, and it was actually just a missile from the enemy. She falls into the ocean, has amnesia now, and Venom tries to help her recover her memory by showing her old photos. This eventually makes her very disturbed, and she tears out her insides like the scene in Ground Zeroes, finding the bomb once again, and it goes off. Of course this is all an illusion, but what it actually represents is the medic's own trauma and guilt for not finding the second bomb. He feels like he failed her, Chico, and he feels responsible for Big Boss's coma and Kaz losing his limbs. He's a medic, and medics only wanted to preserve life. He failed to do that. So he tries desperately to create that illusion, but even so, he still can't hold on to it. The best part about this scene is that there's little exposition. Venom doesn't say anything, but you feel all of it. It's possibly my favourite scene in the game. Tragedy is pretty much what will go on to define Venom Snake's life until he's killed by Solid Snake. He took the blast of the bomb to save Big Boss, lost his arm, and now he's been brainwashed and surgically reconstructed to become his double, in order to ensure that Big Boss can create Zanzibars out of heaven in secret, while the whole world has their eyes on Venom Snake. The loss of his men evidently takes a massive toll on Snake. He's clearly losing his mind, as seen when he's spreading his comrades' ashes on his face. It's difficult to blame him. After all, he's nothing but a pawn of Big Boss and Zero, despite whatever justifications those two choose to use. It's pretty messed up when you actually think about it, and that's putting it lightly. That's why I can't accept the idea that Venom Snake is a pawn until the very end, working with Big Boss, and gladly accepting his fate in his dying breath. The idea that both Venom and Big Boss form a scheme to send Solid Snake, a clone of the world's best soldier, known for his remarkable skills in solo missions, and then be shocked that he succeeds, it's never been an idea I liked. Yes, Solid Snake is the clone with the recessive genes, and at this point of the timeline he's a rookie. But if I wanted to conduct a plan to send a soldier on a suicide mission to infiltrate Outer Heaven so that I can keep not only my cover, but that of my brainwashed double, my first choice wouldn't be the clone of the world's greatest soldier. Big Boss himself trained Solid Snake and even taught him CQC. What a great friend he is to Venom Snake, giving his clone the tools he'd need to succeed in infiltration and kill Venom. Oh, he's a real pal. Thanks, Big Boss. Nah, it's not how I imagined the story playing out at all. With my understanding of Venom, in my latest playthrough of MGS5, I see a broken soul by the end. And this conclusion is set 11 years before Metal Gear 1, when he actually does trigger the Outer Heaven uprising. If he was that fractured by the end of 1984, I can only imagine what 11 more years does to him. In my headcanon, he would have snapped at one point, rejecting playing the pawn, and eventually ended his relationship with Big Boss, who at this point is just as bad as Zero in his eyes. They've both used Venom and put the spotlight on him, Kaz, and all the soldiers who Venom treats as family. By the end of Metal Gear Solid 5, the soldiers don't seem to care that he isn't the real Big Boss. They follow him regardless. Isn't it possible he'd eventually want to rid the world of Cypher's control and Big Boss too? And that's why he threatens the world with nukes? Not unlike Solidus in MGS2? So the real Big Boss, who's currently the commander of the Foxhound unit, has to entrust Solid Snake to put an end to Venom, knowing that the spotlight would turn to him soon after. That's why he trains him personally, and arms him with the techniques of CQC, and all the skills he would need to succeed in a mission like this. It would be a much more interesting story to me if he actually believed Solid Snake would succeed, and if him and Venom were at odds. This way it adds a lot more depth to the events of Metal Gear 2, when Solid Snake and the real Big Boss fight. It'd be a lot more tragic too, echoing the end of Snake Eater. But that's just where my mind gravitates towards. In reality, we'll never see it happen. So for now, if you don't like this idea and prefer the generally accepted explanation that Venom Snake and Big Boss were playing Solid Snake and didn't expect him to live, then it's good that we can both enjoy the ambiguity of it all and accept our own canon. If there's one thing I hope we can all agree on though, it's that Venom Snake is a really interesting character, which is great writing, seeing as he's being compared to Solid Snake, Big Boss, Liquid Snake and Solidus. He's right up there with them as far as I'm concerned, and he was a bright spot among the many issues I had with the story of MGS5. You might be convinced with how negative this video ended up being that I think the game is awful. Funny enough, I still think the game is pretty great. Despite its many shortcomings, it still has so much to offer, and it has a quality that is lost on most AAA titles today: ambition. I'll take a game that failed to reach its ambition over safe mediocrity any day. I may not have connected with Phantom Pain like I did with most of the games of this franchise, but thanks to its unmatched gameplay and some moments of genuine heart, for every reason that made me want to hate this game, it gave me 10 more to appreciate it. I'm looking at my script now and man, it's such a mess. I have no idea how this will translate into video form, but thank you for making it this far. I'll see you next time.